Welcome to Mindfulness Unscripted. I'm your host, Jon Orsini. Take a big breath in. Here we go.
So I used to work for the state credit union, in corporate America space. And I mean, there's a lot that I can unfold of what led me to shifting out of that space. But when I did, I knew in my heart for a while before I took that leap that I had more to offer. And this job was meeting certain needs as like a single mom, right? With like insurance and vacation and holidays. But there were a lot of needs that were more important to me that weren't being met. And I can only push that aside for so long. And at some point I had to answer that call. And so I knew the time would come, and I just sat and I kept fertilizing that soil until that seed was able to grow. And I knew what I wanted to do and I knew why I wanted to do it, but I didn't know how. And I thought I had to know the how before I started to do it. And then I realized that maybe the universe, God, my soul, my guides, whatever, has a much better intended path than what I can conceptualize in my mind. So let me just let go of the how and take one small step in the right direction, which was actually a really big step of leaving my job. And it was so beautiful the way the path that unfolded. And so that's continued to teach me to just surrender that. I don't know how, but I have so much faith through the journey and through using these tools and guiding other people with these tools that I'm able to turn over that more. Just let it be open to where I should be. God, just lead me to where I should be and give me the strength to show up is really what I keep asking for.
That's fantastic. So a couple of things that stood out. I love this so much because one is the idea that sometimes, and this is perfectly valid, sometimes there's this sense of if we're not sure what to do, the metaphor of if the water's muddy, then sit still so the mud can settle, then the water becomes clear. And that's legit. But I've been for periods of time in my life, I'm thinking, especially to my early 30s, I felt like I was sitting for years waiting for the fucking mud to clear, and it was just never clearing. And I was like, oh my God, what? So as much as there is such validity to that, because the more you mess with stuff, the more it kicks up the mud, to stick with that metaphor, right? As much as there's validity to that and a time and a place for that, then on the flip side, I also noticed there is absolutely a time and a place to just with pure faith take a step forward. And then if that step, you're like, ooh, I stepped on something sharp, or that wasn't it, then you're like, okay, next step is over this way, right? And then in taking the steps reveals the next thing. And that involves, I don't know about you, but that involves running into the security behind quote unquote perfectionism, right? To be like, oh, I'm only going to take a step once I know it's the right step. But there are times where you're just it's almost the opposite of the muddy water thing. It's by just taking a swing, that's how you clear it. By taking a swing, by taking a leap, that's how you find out what's in front of you. And so sometimes, so that's beautiful. And then the other thing I want to reflect on is that as you mentioned, being a single mom, so having the job, having the security, and also having someone to look after, because I think so much of in this space, and I'm one of these people, at this point, I don't have kids. Right? Or for instance, a family, people to support things like that in that way. My family is supportive of me and I'm so grateful, but it's also easier for me to take a leap. When I left Los Angeles in 2021 to go to Kripalu, for instance, and some different stuff like that, right? But what I love about your story is that you have a family, you have someone to take care of, and things like this, and you still had the courage, the foresight, the tenacity, all the things to take that leap, to live in your dream, to live in your truth, to live in your authenticity. And when that story comes from someone like you, it is so much more meaningful because you are living it. You are walking the walk, talking the talk, kind of thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. It's almost because I have kids, I shouldn't. But for me, it was because I have kids or these other responsibilities, I should. I have to live to my fullest potential. I got to this identity crisis point, I'd say 27, 28, 29, when I knew who I was as a mom. I knew who I was as a wife, a daughter, but I didn't know who I was. My friendships were based off of my ex-husband's friends' wives and girlfriends, or just by default, but I wasn't going out and finding people that were passionate about things that I was passionate about, because I didn't even know what I was passionate about. And I learned that it was never really fostered when I was a child. My interests weren't fostered, invested in. So instead of, I mean, of course I did ruminate in that for a while unknowingly. I decided to just take action and start figuring out what those things were and trying different things and, you know, redirecting. Okay, let me try this. And not so much, but maybe I met this cool person that now leads me to this. So I really started to dive in and find what I was passionate about. And that just made me a better mom. It showed my kids that like you can have your own identity, and what I like, my kids don't have to like. We all have completely different interests, and we support one another and how unique that is. And we show up for their talent shows or for their practices and their games and their championships. And they do the same for me. And they're able to see me as a whole being. I think I struggled in my relationship with my parents because I only seen them as my attachment to them,
Mm.
that they were my mom, so they should be X, Y, and Z, but I wasn't able to see them as a whole human being that also had, like, I thought I was the main character of everybody's life.
Mhm.
And then I realized that I wasn't. But I realized that through finding my own interests in my own self, I was able to see, like, oh, they're their own person with their own story, their own journey, their own interests and ambitions.
Mm.
Um, so my children, I think, were my greatest aspiration. They know themselves so deeply. It was like very inspiring to me. And I realized because it created an environment and I gave them tools and kind of stepped back and got out of their way. So it's like, how can I do this for other people? First, for myself, you know, how can I gain these tools? And how can I foster a safe environment for her to figure out who she is and to grow into that? And then I really wanted to bring that to other people as well, and to
Mm.
give them a sense of community and belonging and all the things that maybe, you know, I took an inventory and realized all the things that I didn't have. And then, okay, now I can bring those to myself and inevitably to other people was my intention. But
Beautiful. Yeah, that's fantastic.
yeah.
And and I've heard, again, I don't have kids, but I try to take all the notes I can in the event that I eventually do. And um, but I have, and I have nephews, so I take notes and like I'm learning there from my sister and brother-in-law and things and through them, which is great. And one of the biggest things I hear and one of the biggest things I talk to people about too a lot, because a lot of times adults will ask me about breath work or meditation with their children, with their
Hmm.
kids. And so all of this pointing to the idea that kids, my understanding is that kids don't really do what you say or respond to what you say. They respond to how you are. Like they co-regulate with your nervous system. And
Hmm.
so the idea that you living in your vibrant self, like your whole self, that is an energetic there's an energetic translation that's beyond language, that's beyond anything you could teach verbally, is by
Hmm.
embodying your full self. Is like I would imagine the best lesson you can give a child, and it's not even verbalized. I mean, like there may be
Sure.
ways that super articulate people can verbalize it as well, but it's like through the practice of being it, you share that through co-regulation, and I can't imagine a better gift um,
Mm.
to share with kids. I mean, that's fantastic. So.
Yeah, it's true. Absolutely. And I agree. And it's opened completely new doors for my children where, you know, at first, especially my oldest, all of a sudden took on this responsibility as man of the house when I had gotten divorced. And so he was like, Mom, what are we going to do? And I was like, it's okay. I left my job in April and I was like, I'm good until September. If I can't start making money and paying the bills in the way that I want to, I'll just get another job. Like I believe that I'm capable to just, you know, bow down. Okay, sure. Go back to the patriarchy, get another job. And so the kids would even help me like build my website. He created a QR code for me. We would, when I started doing workshops and I'd print out pamphlets, we'd be at Staples, the three of us, and I'd gather the prints and he'd put them in the right order and he'd staple them. And they were such an important part of my journey. And they started to see that, like, wow, I don't need to think inside of a box. I don't have to pick one of these 6 careers that are offered to me, that I could do something alternatively. I could find, you know, what my skill is. I did this whole, I'm very big on inventory. So I'll always take an inventory on something. And it was like, what do people come to me for most?
Mm.
And usually it comes from the place of where my greatest break or fracture was, and then how I overcame that. And then people are like, hey, how did you do this? And, you know, so I was like, okay, this is the gift that I have to share to the world. And people are already asking me for it anyways. And so I had a really difficult time. I don't know about you, but like transitioning that into a career and charging people for something that just so genuinely was a part of me.
Mm.
But then I realized that I was doing a disservice by not charging them, because if I wasn't, then I'd have to work a full-time job and I wouldn't be available to like sharpen and hone my skills and offer them to other people. And it was like, would I pay somebody to teach what I'm teaching 100%. Like if
Hmm.
somebody could step up and guide me in the ways that I'm able to guide other people 10 years ago when I needed these skills, take all my money. It's completely invaluable.
Yeah.
So it's just a quick mindset shift of like listening to the right thing, having the right conversations, and sitting and waiting for the water to clear. I guess there was a lot of time and waiting for it to not be so muddy, but I love what you talked about with the shifting of the weight. And then so maybe if there's a sharp object here, then I just step this way, or I'm more mindful about where I'm placing my feet. And if I sat and waited, I say this about my children, if I sat and waited to have kids until I was ready, I would have, like, when would I have ever gotten to that point and been like, okay, now, you know?
Yeah.
And the craziest thing for me is my oldest son just turned 16 and I'm 37. So I was pregnant with him at 20, 21, had him very early. And I remember for a while, I was like, why was this my path to become a mom so early? I never would have chose this. By the time I was 27, I was no longer able to have children. And so
Mm.
that was a big God moment in my life where I was like, if I had them when I thought, I might not have been able to ever have children at all. So it
Wow.
really is on God's time.
Yeah.
And I may not understand it in the moment. And it took 7 years for me to have that aha of like, oh, wow, I had them then because I couldn't have had them later. So,
Right. That's incredible. That always, I mention this, people who know me have heard me say this ad nauseum, but the horse and the farmer story, or the story of the Taoist farmer, where it's like, the farmer's horse runs away, the village is like, that's terrible. And he's like, maybe. And they're like,
yes.
they think he's crazy because they're like, no, of course it's terrible, objectively terrible. He goes, I actually don't know. And then the next day, horse comes back with all these horse friends, and the guy's just like basking in beautiful horses, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, what a turn of events!" And he goes, "Maybe." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like that continual thing of just like life takes on context as it continues to move on, which is another thing I say about it is it's all, depending on what's going on, it is so much easier said than done to sit in with that belief.
Mm,
Um, but also it could give us the strength to like move through times where we're uncertain or uncomfortable, or just feel, it's just like, just keep going, because with the next thing comes more context, you know?
mhm.
So that's incredible. I mean, what a journey.
Oh yeah, I'm so grateful that I had that and many other things where it was like we force a relationship or we force a job or we want to hold on to something longer than we should, and inevitably it's going to end. We're just going to torture ourselves till we get there.
Mm,
And then at some point I ended up having to like, oh, that's why I met that person and spent that amount of time with them.
mm,
Even in the path that I'm in now, if I look at every silly little job, back to the first job I took at Dairy Queen was my first job as a teenager.
mhm,
I see a certain part of me that it created that now allows me to be the whole human being that I am now. Every little job gave me some little skill set, whether it was being personable or detail orientated or service orientated, has given me. I never went to college. So through all these experiences, it gave me what I need to offer what I do now. So I look
yeah,
back down the line and I'm like, oh, that makes sense,
that's
which I try
beautiful.
to do often. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. So with all that in mind, did it start
Mm.
with yoga? Like, what was the practice that started the path?
Yeah, yoga was my gateway drug, 100%.
Hmm.
Didn't know it at the time, just wanted to get into something. I definitely, when I look back through, there was always a thread of wanting a community and to be a part of something. Even when I was a child, we had a church in our backyard, and like the minister lived next door with his wife. And I was always curious about what was going on there, and I wanted to be a part of it. And I know it's because I wanted to be a part of something greater than myself, and I wanted to belong. And that was something that I never felt as a child of divorced parents. It's like when I was with my mom and my stepdad, culturally, his family's beliefs were different. So I never really truly felt like I fit in there. And then when I'd go to my dad's, he lived at my stepmom's with all her kids, and us kids kind of like slept in the living room. And I never felt like I fit in there.
Mm,
So it was like no matter where I went, and now I've uncovered this and understood. So I think that was what I initially saw with yoga. It was at that same time when I was trying to figure out what my interests were, trying to meet people that I vibed with or understood. And so I had gone with my next door neighbor and we went to a little class here in town. And I was like, okay. And I liked to move my body in that way. I liked how it was a couple of us chatting afterwards. It got us out. And so I just kept going and I kept going. And at first, I was really into the physical practice. I wanted to push myself for all the hand balances and crazy things like that.
mhm,
And then we started to incorporate breath work. and mantras and chanting and all these different things. And I could not deny that it was unlocking something like deep within myself.
Mm,
And so I went on a yoga retreat to Belize. It was my 30th birthday gift to myself. This was just after my divorce, and that completely transformed my life. First time traveling, traveled to a third world country, 9 days of immersive, like deep breath work. We did large group, collaborative type of thing. So connecting to other people, you'd be vulnerable, crying and shaking on the floor in the morning, and then you'd be rafting or climbing through the ruins. And I was like, this is fantastic.
mm,
So yoga was what started it all. And then even like I ski, I shoot archery, I rock climb, all of these things I learned after 30. And I really
mm.
think coming into yoga, trying something new, learning that my body was capable of more than I thought, being okay with being a beginner at something, um, just supported me to like get out there and try new things and find new hobbies and interests. So,
That's fantastic. That's so cool. And that's inspiring too, because there's a lot of misconceptions around yoga,
mhm,
around like, and you're saying how initially it started with the physical aspect, but then all the other layers, with the breathwork, chanting, mantra, all these other things, like all these layers upon layers reveal themselves. And I feel like there's more discussion I'm noticing in the yoga realm, where, like westernized or Americanized yoga is very much about the fitness component, about
mhm,
doing handstands, headstands, stuff like that, which are all a beautiful part of the practice, but that yoga is not really about exercise.
mhm.
Like the word yoga is union, right?
Yeah.
Union of mind, body, spirit, all these things, right? Layers upon layers. And there's more, I've noticed more discussion around that. And it's like, so you can make your practice as physical as you want, but you could also just make it as, whether you want to call it spiritual or emotionally centering. And it doesn't have to be so physical all the time. It's like you could take it however you want to take it. And then it's cool that you're saying like learning these things at 30, which of course is still incredibly young, and
True.
there's an,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's still incredibly young, but still sometimes people be like, oh, they'll think I'm 30. Like it's, depending on a person's mindset, you know what I
Mhm,
mean? But it's like, I'm even personally getting more, I'm actually really starting to get serious. I've been doing some form of yoga for about 20 years. Um, on and off and like little bits at a time and fits and starts, but it's like I'm getting closer to 40 and only now am I actually starting to take yoga more seriously. You know what I
mhm.
mean? I'm just like, wow. And I'll just say one other thing about it, which is this thing from Carl Jung always comes up in my mind, and he said something like, life starts at 40. Anything before that is just research.
Yeah, I
You know?
agree. I could feel that for sure. It's clicking. I too am coming up. I'll be 38 this year,
Hmm.
and I'm like, I, well, Richard Rohr also talks about like three chapters of the life: the first, the second, and the third. So we're in the second right now. We're
Mm,
in the like integrating all the things that we learned in the first part of the journey, and then in the third part of the journey is when you really get to just like marinate in it and be in it. So we're
mm.
applying. We're in the application stage of the lessons that we've learned along the way.
That's cool.
Um,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
super
but
exciting.
I agree. It's difficult with the physical practice. I even had gone to a couple of classes, and then I remember I went to the local library and I got DVDs on yoga, and I would put my kids to sleep and I would watch them and I would practice them because I felt like in order for me to go into a class, I had to know what I was doing.
Mm,
How am I gonna? They're gonna say this, and I don't know what that means, and like I didn't allow myself to be a beginner, so I practiced so hard here. I'm here in my room.
mm.
I practiced so hard to get those like physical parts. And it's so funny when I look back on it now. I think she's so sweet and I just want to give her a hug. And I'm like, girl, you have no idea what you're about to unlock. And one of them was chanting, and we were chanting like Om Yam Lam Ram. And so I was chanting that over and over. And just the way that I felt afterwards, like it shook me. I didn't know that that level of like calm, clear presence was accessible.
Mm.
And that was when my practice really changed as well.
That's so cool. And it's interesting, right? Because sometimes, like from the outside, sometimes certain chanting things is like, what is that? Especially if it's in Sanskrit or something, it's like, what is that? But something about that that resonates so strong too is whether it's the chanting is creating vibration in our own body
Mhm.
through a sound. Of course, words carry a lot of power and meaning as well, but even just the physical sensation of the vibration, and it just at face value to someone who maybe is curious or skeptical or whatever they are that hasn't experienced it physically, it might seem like, okay, I get it, but like I understand what that is, but it's so simple. Like
Mhm.
what you just, like what are you doing? but there's a difference between knowing something or understanding it cognitively or seeing what it
Hmm.
is, and whether we're skeptical or not, it's sort of like, yeah, okay, I get it. It's like, right. But when you practice it, when
Hmm.
you chant over and over again, like what it does to your nervous system and your body, it's like you can have, and especially with the breath too, as you know, you can have these mystical experiences, and it's just you and your breath and your own sound, right? And your own body. And it's hard to describe that. And even for people who have experienced it, I think sometimes there's, it's not that it's so hard to maintain a practice, but it's so easy to let it fall to the side. But
Mm-hmm.
when we maintain a practice, it takes us to these other places, and it could be so conceptually simple, but so profound in practice, not just theory.
Yeah, some of the most profound experiences in my life were the most simple moments. Like looking at the clouds, like watching the
Mm,
river flow. Like for me, all of my metaphors, most of my life lessons come from time in nature and like being still there.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it's really interesting the misconceptions around yoga. And with I think a lot of the practices that we teach, I've been to your workshops. I teach them very much the same way, where it's like people want to scientifically know, and we give them as much facts as we can because some people need that in order to trust the physical practice.
mhm.
But I tell people all the time, I'm like, you just have to do it. Just come and experience it. I can't do it any justice by trying to explain to you, and what I experience is going to be completely different than what you experience.
Right.
So I just really would love to encourage people to just
Hmm.
try and try a couple different teachers and couple different types of workshops. And even if you tried it 10 years ago and you didn't love it, like my first time skiing, I was like 13, had a terrible first time. And then I tried it again a long time later and it clicked then. It's just like when you hear a song and then you hear it like 10 years later and it finally clicks and makes sense.
Yeah,
It's like just to be open to try things, period.
that's
Just be
beautiful.
open to try.
Yeah, it's beautifully said, and the practices do resonate different, even with ourselves. Like one experience to the next with breathwork, for instance, they're never the same. They're
Hmm.
never the same, right? Like in because you're calling up things from your deeper nervous system and your unconscious, essentially, and as you do that, right, there's different layers upon layers of the onion that reveal themselves. So it's like it's also that sense of there's a certain relinquishing of control because it's beyond our regular everyday consciousness in many cases.
Hmm.
Yeah, so just being willing to dive in and reveal the layers. It's beautiful. Um, so with all this in mind, you've got this new retreat that you're opening up. I mean, like, so tell me, I mean, you got this is so exciting.
Oh,
What's
yeah.
going on? Yeah.
It is. Talk about like this kind of comes full circle to the beginning of our conversation because I'm in this period of faith and deep trusting in my path and that'll end up where I'm supposed to be. So back in October, I had this has always been an idea of mine. I shouldn't say always, but for the past few years to find a property. I've always been drawn to like older houses, big pieces of land, lots of different buildings, and I would like see a greenhouse and be like, "Ooh, that could be this." My mind just was very creative with these types of properties, always drawn. And in the past year, I started to actually look at physical spaces. And in October, I found this one property, put in an offer on it, and it was an open house. I went on a Sunday, and you had to have highest and best in by Wednesday. And I was like, oh my gosh, didn't even have like an official pre approval. Scrambled to do the best that I can, made all the calls, put in an offer, offered full asking price. And inevitably, they ended up taking somebody else's offer. And I was
Mm,
like, okay, I'm comfortable in the home that I'm in now. Like, I love the job that I have now. I'm totally at peace that thank God I'm not in a desperate situation.
mhm,
I accept it. And about a month later, I was actually the night of me hosting my fall retreat. I get a phone call from my realtor, and he said, the sellers want to know if your offer's still on the table. The original buyers fell through.
mm,
And I was like, oh, I knew deep in my soul. And so did my realtor. He was like, Autumn, this place is so perfect for you. I knew that it wasn't done yet, but I didn't want to have this like hope and expectation.
mm,
So, anyways, that was in November. And from November to December, we were in this gray area. There was no formal contract. They didn't officially accept. They were just wondering if my offer was still on the table.
mm,
And the amount of practice that I had to do over those next 4 weeks of just turning it over, trying to stay present in the moment, just being patient. Every time I would pray on it, for me, prayer, just the silent time of meditation, I would hear, just be patient, don't
mm,
force, go with the flow. So I'm like, okay, I did everything I could, I'm ready to answer the call if it comes, but I'm just going to like try to get through the holidays and be present with my kids. We officially went under contract on Christmas Day, which is wild because the
Mm,
address of the property is Diamond Lane. And I kept saying after I got the call in November, all I want for Christmas is a diamond. All I want for Christmas, right?
mhm,
And so we went under contract Christmas Day. And it's been a long process, but we were set to close this past Friday. We ran into the day before closing an issue with the lender. So we're extended another 30 days before we close. And it's been the most rewarding journey that I've been on these past 6 months. I've always said, even if I don't get it, the amount of lessons that I've learned, the amount of support that I've acquired, the willingness that I have to just like completely, I had a wellness studio. I closed that a couple weeks ago to transition here, left my full-time job, am willing to sell and leave the house that I've had for the past 11 years and just start completely over and go all in. So it's been unbelievably valuable journey along the way. I've already learned so much, but
mm,
the intention of the space is to host wellness retreats and wellness workshops of my own, which I do now, and to invite other people to come in and to share what they have to offer, and for it to be like a great community landing space. We want to link up with like homeschool co-ops in the area so that they can come and we can teach. And we're going to put together a summer camp program in the summer that's going to teach mindful practices, archery, yoga, just all these great skills that I'm acquiring now at 30, 40, and to try to bring them to basically the age where I needed them the most, which was teenage years.
mm,
I learned that I just didn't have the tools. Like even with my divorce, when people ask why, what happened, we didn't have the tools. We didn't have the tools to overcome a lot of the circumstances that we were given.
mhm.
All of my 20s, that was the theme of my 20s. Hard time, don't have the tools. So the 30s was about let's find the tools, let's sharpen the sword, and let's bring them to others. Um, so that's the intention of the space. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I actually just recorded, because I occasionally record these solo podcasts, and I was just long story short was around the idea of stress and the difference between essentially good stress and bad stress is if we can catalyze the energy or not, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if so, when you're saying like having the tools, because the thing is, we have some degree of say in what we invite into our life, but so much of life is just stuff that comes up for any number of reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's some of both. And so, which is all to say, we can't choose to not have stress in whatever form it comes in. We can't just be like, you know what, I'm gonna not have stress. That's the life I'm gonna live, right? Like stuff's gonna inevitably come up, and then it becomes a question of, as you just articulate so well, like, do we have the tools? Do we have the resources?
Mm-hmm.
So, am I well resourced? And that's also, I think, what is the baseline of confidence, right? Because we don't know
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen. So, like the idea of confidence, like, oh, I'll be fine. It's like, yeah, but you don't even know what's coming. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? In any given situation. So, what do you mean you'll be fine? You don't know. But the thing is, you can have faith in your resilience.
Mm-hmm.
You can have faith in your resources. I think that's why having some sort of practice, whether it's meditation, prayer, things like you're saying, are so foundational. And so anyway, so the idea that you're going to bring this, and you mentioned like teenagers, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously adults need these resources you were talking about in the 20s, and like I'm sure anybody of any age could resonate with wanting to be more resilient or having more resources. But what a beautiful thing to share it with teenagers in this like really
Mm-hmm.
formative growing phase. So that's beautiful. What a cool thing.
Yeah. So I work at Westover School, which is a private school here in town, and I work with girls of high school age. And I run a life fitness program. So we do, group training, we do nutrition, we do yoga, we do mindful outdoor experiences, and we do rock climbing. And
Mm,
a lot of people ask how the rock climbing ties into, which I'd love to share about it.
mm,
But I realized I really struggled working with that age group at first. And it was because that was when I struggled to connect to myself the
mm.
most.
That's big.
So I didn't know how to connect to 14-year-old Autumn. I realized I didn't know how to connect to these other 14-year-old young women. So it was a really big calling for me to step forward and to work with. I had done a lot of inner child work, but realizing now we're at the stage of like recognizing the teenager and doing some inner teenage work, which we don't hear often, but there was a lot to work around there. So stepping into that position allowed me to do that. And I've really loved working with them. So again, I did an inventory when I decided to leave this job to shift into this new space, saying, what do I love and value most about this chapter in my life? What would I like to take forward with me? And it was really working with young adults and teenagers. And I know what I love about that work is we don't get instant gratification. I know that I'm simply planting seeds that
Mm.
hopefully one day these students can come back to. Some of the students are like, this practice has been so good for my mind, and some just don't get it. They don't understand the value in it. Maybe they never will.
Mm.
Um, they can't deny though, when they come into class and after we do yoga on a Friday, how still and quiet and slow. They might not notice it, but I notice it within
Mm.
them.
Yeah.
So I do want to continue doing that level of work
Yep.
with youth of that age.
You know what I can absolutely say to all of this is, so I initially went to Kripalu to learn from Micah Mortali, who runs the outdoor
Mm.
programs, and because I read his book Rewilding, and shout out to Micah because he was like a big mentor at a very transitional time, and I literally drove across the country to seek him out, and like so this is all to say that when I started, they do the mindful outdoor guide training at Kripalu, so that was my first
Mhm.
training there. And when I started guiding these mindful outdoor hikes and experiences like kayaking and also archery, uh, what I realized was how many adults we would do a meditation, an outdoor we would go on a hike, and then about halfway through we do an outdoor meditation, and then we come back from the meditation, and people share about their experiences if they want to, and how often people would share, I was just sitting there watching the leaves in the breeze, for instance, right? And they'll say, I was brought back to this moment in childhood. And so, like you're saying, it's planting seeds. So what I'm getting at is I can't tell you how many times grown adults have, when they spend actual quiet time connected to the outdoors, have these flashbacks to childhood peak experience memories of nature that they didn't even realize were peak
Mhm.
experiences of nature at the time. It was just like you're saying, a seed planted that they didn't even recognize at the time. They might have even been like a cranky teenager being a pain to their parents, but a seed was planted. And of course, the parents wouldn't know because they were a teenager's being a teenager. But now fast forward these years later, and they're like, oh my God, that planted in me a love or appreciation for pine trees, or, for lakes, or like something that they didn't even realize was happening at the time.
Mhm.
So just to reinforce what you're saying, I see it time and again with adults sharing stuff that was planted at a younger age.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, so much of us can talk about, and I could speak for like all the difficult circumstances I faced as a child and then how they show up as an adult. But like, how much do we honor the good seeds that were planted and how they show up as an
Mm.
adult, or make space to recognize them? And a lot of times it's our senses that can like trigger us back into a moment. Or for me, it was um, a lot of what personally led me onto this healing journey was I started to have like physical manifestations in my body that didn't really have any explanation. And so I was walking out of work one day and my head locked and I couldn't lift my head and my shoulder locked completely. And I was like perplexed as to what was going on, really frightened. Went to the doctor and they did scans on my spine because I was having numbness down my arm. And when they lift my shoulder girdle, it was this whole crazy phenomenon. And they diagnosed me with post concussive syndrome.
Mm.
And it happened about a year later. Same thing. Everything locked in my body, particularly on the left side, which now I've learned so much about the masculine and the feminine sides of the body.
Mhm.
And so basically I had never experienced physical whiplash, but my body was experiencing emotional whiplash. And so I was subjecting myself to something that I had experienced in an earlier relationship and then over and over in this relationship, and my body was going through these physical responses to it. And so my, thank God, physical therapist was working with me and started to notice these symptoms. And she's like, I think you should see a cranial sacral therapist. So she referred me to Tammy at the Body's Wisdom, which completely changed my life. My first appointment with her felt like 20 years of, like, honestly, 20 years of talk therapy couldn't have even cracked that open, didn't
Mm.
even touch what she did. So by her working in a certain space within my body and asking me what I felt, and me setting aside, like just answering what came up first, right, from the subconscious. And then we would talk a little bit deeper and it would crack me wide open. I'd hysterically cry. We'd process it through the body. I'd process it through my mind. And then it felt like it just didn't have the grip over me anymore.
Mm.
And since I've been working with her, I go monthly for that. I haven't had any reoccurrence of the muscular stuff in my body. Unfortunately, I do now have um, disc herniations, and sometimes I get nerve stuff, but this led me to be really mindful about my physical movements. So that led me to go through personal training. I wanted to learn how to still use my body physically in all the ways that I did without creating more injury or impairment within my body. So I got
Mm.
certified as a pain-free performance specialist. And I did that initially just to learn more about my body dynamics. And then I started to uncover the spiritual and emotional end of it, of how much our soma, our body, is impacted by these traumatic experiences, and it holds on until we, and breath has been a huge, dude, the last time I went to your breath workshop at Kripalu, I can't even tell you how much unlocked the conversation that it led to me having with my ex-husband, and what it healed for us and how much it's transmuted our relationship has been amazing.
Well,
Amazing. But that led me to understanding the healing within my physical body.
mm, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that and for saying that. And I'm glad to hear that between the cranial sacral work and it was really nice to give it. Was it Tammy? Tammy, did you say?
Tammy at the
Yeah.
body's wisdom. Yeah.
So, well, I want to talk about too, because like being Connecticut based in these, so
Mm,
it's beautiful that you gave the shout out to the work, because it's as people who, as yourself as well, like that guide the work. The main thing is like we guide this stuff because it changed our life. Like
mhm.
I don't think anybody has dedicated their life to guiding something unless it foundationally shifted the earth they were walking on, right? And so whenever you connect with someone that it resonates with them the way it resonated for you as the person who became the guide, it's like
Mhm,
this is why we do this, to
mhm,
find the hearts that it resonates with. And everything you're saying and articulating about the word somatic has become more and more known over the past years, which I'm so grateful for, referring to the body essentially,
mhm,
right? And that there's more and more emerging science around that memory lives in our physical tissues. So even for people who are skeptical or cynical or just be like cranial sacral, what? I'm just going to go to the doctor and pop a pill or something, right? You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, everybody's on their journey, but that memory lives in the tissue. So, like, if something affected us in our physical or emotional body, that memory is physically, I'll say it one more time, in the tissues. So, like,
mhm,
you could talk circles around it, like you said, 20 years in talk therapy or something. You could talk circles around it, but it's not necessarily going to access it in the tissues.
mhm,
Talk therapy is important too because it could help bridge it, right? But they're two
mhm,
sides of the same coin that support each other. And um, I'm going to say this one other thing about this is a much longer story for another time, but essentially, Freud had a somatic practice that,
mhm.
as far as I can see and understand, got completely lost to history. So I dug this up in like an obscure French philosophy book. And then I actually met someone at Kripalu the other day. She was in one of my breathwork sessions at Kripalu, and she came up to me after and she said something about Freud, and we started talking. She's the first person I've met. I've talked to tons of highly trained psychiatrists and psychologists that had never heard this. But that
Mm,
Freud, essentially, when he would work with traumatized war veterans, he found that when he would continue to talk and talk, he was like, it seemed to be making them worse when we would
yes.
recount them verbally. So I started to work with them physically in their body. And I was like, holy shit, he's talking about somatic practice.
Wow.
So this is again for any skeptics or cynical people, it's like, no, this has been like since the early days of therapy. Even Freud was practicing. So I don't know how that got lost to history. Somebody out there probably knows much better than certainly than I do. But anyways, I'm just so glad it's making a comeback. And the way that you're articulating your experience is so helpful and hopefully helpful for people to hear because
Mhm,
sometimes people can get frustrated just like trying the same thing over and over or not sure how to
mhm,
address a deeper issue, and that there are these modalities available and they've affected our lives like you and me, and that's why we guide them
mhm.
because they're so impactful. So yeah, thank you for sharing about that part of your experience.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you just talked about, I want to dive in. I'm such like a, I want to dive in and understand more. So I look forward
Mm,
to diving in and understanding more about all of that. But I felt like talk therapy served its purpose in my life, but it was like I I get it, right? I know all the scenarios, but like it's not healing me. I
mm,
understand it in my mind. I can have some sort of working 12-step programs completely changed everything for me, which is a form of talking, right? Talk therapy, understanding how the mind works, how the mind's linked to the behaviors that we have, how they show up, how they're patterned. But like talking about patterned, right? We have these patterned ways that we respond to situations. So do our body. So
Hmm.
as I sit here like cross-legged, and I know that if I keep crossing my left leg over and over, it's going to pattern the way that my body moves, the way that my hips stand, which is then going to throw my shoulders off, which is chain reaction up the body.
Hmm.
So if every time I'm experiencing a traumatic situation, I'm, cleansing up these muscles,
Hmm.
um, I'm creating this pattern. So I'm trying to unlock and unwind these patterns in my body. And a lot of what I do now is if I feel something, I'll pause and I'll ask it and be like, what are you trying to tell me? Like, where is this coming from? Where am I holding tension? Or I've had a lot of, as I had mentioned, I couldn't have kids after 27. I ended up having my uterus removed at 27.
Mm.
I went through chronic illness from 19 to 27 with 5 abdominal surgeries, medical intervention, medications, with no relief. And
Mm.
it wasn't until I started to address the way that stress was manifesting in my body, the food that I was eating, and the quality of sleep that I was getting, did I actually start to see a turnaround in
Yeah.
the expression of these symptoms in my body. And
Mhm.
so that's when I started to learn that those are the 3 things that can like change and impact our DNA.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the medical system like never touched on any of it, and I was resentful towards it for a while, but I had like PTSD from everything that I went through. And then working a 12-step program really helped me come to understanding and like making amends and making peace. And it's like, what did this journey teach me? And then how could I be empowered and take that into my own hands? And it was going on like an AIP protocol diet, not eating inflammatory foods, um, and a lot of emotional processing, knowing, understanding the root chakra and where it is in that space, and understanding that my mom had it and her mom had it and her mom had it. And it's like, well, maybe we all have some form of repression.
Mm.
Maybe it's not just this genetic thing that's being passed down, but like this emotional belief that we all have.
Yeah.
And how can I look back? And I had done this like lineage healing of all the women that stood behind me.
Hmm.
And skeptics, I welcome them entirely. This is my personal experience, and it's transformed and changed everything for me. And it's kept me in remission. It's the only thing that actually was valid. The medications, just I would have to take more medications to deal with the symptoms that would manifest from that. And I was told that it was a chronic disease. I had stage 4 endometriosis. I was told that there was no cure, and I just had to take this medication forever, and every couple of years have this surgery to go in and clear out the scar tissue that was building and connecting all of my internal organs. But I understood too that it was fed by estrogen. So if I eat certain foods that are going to manage my estrogen levels, like wild yams can help with it, and black cohosh, and even eating tofu.
Mm.
Like understanding and doing all this research, becoming my own advocate, helped me get to where I am and have the understanding for myself. And again, tools to share with other people. I can't tell you how many people reach out to me. Just this morning, I had a girlfriend. Us as cyclical beings, men and women, we all have these cyclical cycles we run through. Men on a 24-hour, women 28 to 30 days. The past couple days, I feel my energy is really low. I tried to get out in the sun. I don't feel better. And I was like, well, your progesterone's probably low.
Mm.
And she's like, okay, well, what can I do? And I'm like, well, wild yams can really help that. And she's like, okay. Like these natural tools that we have access to. And even just her knowing that maybe there's something that I could do, or maybe her just knowing that, hey, this happens for a couple days and then I'm going to
Mm.
get over and get just understanding, doing our own research, being our own advocate, having these conversations, listening to, information that's shared from other people's journeys. We have to speak about the things that we went through because it could really help be a guide to somebody else.
Mm. That's beautifully said and super
Yeah.
helpful. I mean, even me, like, not even, like, I'm just saying, like, hearing that is resonating with me personally very strongly right now too, because
Mhm.
sometimes it's not always easy to share certain aspects, but like something, this may seem unrelated, but it's like something that I learned from a life in storytelling in the entertainment industry, whether it's writing or acting in a scene. One of the phrases was, the more specific, the more universal.
Mm.
So sometimes when we have something very specific going on with us, just being open-hearted in our willingness to share, the more it resonates with hearts and can help heal and lend itself to the healing process of others, versus speaking in like kind of broad platitudes or just being like, yeah, like sort of like sort of touching on something, but
Big.
not really getting in there. Yeah. So it's beautiful that you're sharing that. And then, another thing that what you were saying made me think of was you probably know certainly more about this than I do, especially being a female. But I've seen many things about how autoimmune disorders or difficulties disproportionately affect women. It's almost like something like 80% of autoimmune problems are with women, and that in many, many, many cases, there's an emotional basis for it. So again, you can be skeptical, cynical, whatever. Like if there are people out there that are like, oh, and they just only see the Western medicine try to fix what's broken side rather than try to get to the root cause. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's undeniable that there's an emotional component and that it disproportionately affects women. And if we don't ask that question of why and explore, and people like yourself who have gone on this journey, and you mentioned the remission and the healing that's taken place, it's like, sometimes I think of it as the truth is what
Mm-hmm.
works.
Mm-hmm.
Like if something's
Oh,
working,
absolutely.
that's a truth right there. Like it's an
Sure.
undeniable truth, you know?
Sure.
So it's beautiful. And then one more, there were like these bullet points I like had that stacked up in my head because you were saying so many amazing things in there. The other one is because it relates to, again, when you're looking at something scientifically, and you mentioned the left side of the body and then the right side of the body, and you're talking about the feminine and masculine energetically sides of the body. And then you mentioned lineage, and you talk about the
Mm-hmm.
women in your family struggling with this thing. So there's also more emerging science about epigenetics and how biology is passed down through generations. So when
Mm-hmm.
people hear generational trauma or generational joy, it may be like, oh yeah, cute concept, but it's like, no, there's emerging science that energetic values get passed down in the DNA, and that's actually like a primal survival mechanism. If you're born and you're just scared of tigers, you don't even know why. It's like, well, maybe one of your ancestors got attacked by a tiger that lives in the DNA to keep you safe, for
Yeah.
instance, right? Um, so there's a related point is that I can't tell you how many times, because where I came from, breathwork was very science-based. How many times when I started to experience more, I guess if you want to call it metaphysical or spiritual or mystical experiences that I just couldn't explain, but I was experiencing
Mm-hmm.
them firsthand. And I was like, I'm as much of a skeptic as anybody, but I cannot deny that this thing happened. This person communicated with me from, who has passed. So how did they communicate? There's a difference between thinking of someone and feeling a communication.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this may sound like whatever to certain people, but I'm like, was just as skeptical as anybody, right? And I'm like, well, that is undeniable, and especially when it happens more than once. So anyways, just to get to the point about the left and right sides of the body, how many times I've read in books, shamanism, experience with breathwork people, I just started to notice again and again and again, people say the left side, female, maternal lineage, right side, masculine, paternal lineage.
Mm-hmm.
And like in my, like you mentioned, all these things go on your left side, and then you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned this lineage on the mother, grandmother, like in that lineage on your feminine maternal side. In my case, on the right side, I notice everything so far that has happened to my body that's like, what the F is that? Has always happened on the right side, you know,
Fascinating. Yeah.
always. And it's just like, could that be coincidence? Of course it could, but you know what? Going back literally thousands of years through all kinds of lineages, you see time and time again, it just pops up, the left and the right, the left and the right. It's like, how is that repeated through different cultures, through different belief systems? It gets repeated again and again and again and again. Like there's something, there's something
Yeah.
there, right? Undeniable.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's something you have to experience to know. And it's been neat for me because I personally have felt it in my body. And part of what I do at my wellness studio is I do one-on-one hands-on healing sessions with clients. So I utilize some of the craniosacral tools that I've learned now in Reiki energy healing. And a lot of it's intuitively led. And at the end of each session, I simply hold my client's hand. And I cannot tell you how powerful. A lot of people say that that was the most powerful part of the whole practice was just having their hand held.
Mm,
And they'll say, well, when you held my hand on the right side, it felt fine. But then when you held my left side, they start hysterically crying,
mm,
or vice versa. And it's not one particular more than the other. It's just so wild to see how differently people's bodies respond. One side I'll hold and it's really clammy and they're like nervous. And then they finally let go. The other side I can hold and it's like it's just unbelievable to read the energy lines in other people's bodies
Yeah.
separately. So it helps me. It's a guide. It's a really good guide for me to know and to have some insight. And maybe not. Maybe it's not linked to the maternal. Maybe it's just like I slept really bad on that shoulder. Like,
Mm. Yeah.
but could it potentially show me something? Could I go through the list of being like, is there something here in a male relationship that I'm not addressing? Or is it
Hmm.
maybe a hyper masculine symptom that's manifesting in my body that's like, or in my reality that's showing up in my body to give me a clue? Like, I'm going to take a look at it. If it
Yes.
could help, it could potentially help. I'm going to take a look at it.
Right.
You
That's
know?
a beautiful way to put it. No matter where you're drawing the information from, like what philosophy or whatever you think of it, if it's offering information that by considering it and integrating it and trying to make sense of it makes your life better, it's like that's the point. That's the whole
Yeah.
point. So who cares like what you think about like what someone thinks about whatever. It's like it's making your life better. It's making your body better. Like you're feeling better and feeling more connected. It makes that's beautiful.
Yeah. And what you said about truth, and each truth is like subjective, my personal experience and my truth. And there's like hard fact truths, but how many facts have now been changed and we've learned that they weren't actually true. And it's like,
Mm.
yeah, I agree with you. The truth is my personal experience and it's what works for me. It's what doesn't. And I'm also very open to that being adaptable and that changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very willing to say, you know what, I once was completely convicted on this practice and it no longer serves me. So now I'm moving on to something else.
Yeah, it's
So to not
fantastic.
hold so tightly to people, places, things, experiences, and to allow it to adapt
Hmm.
and to grow as we grow.
Beautiful. And just a couple other things you mentioned holding the hand, it made me think of, and I'm sure you probably had heard me say this in at least one of the breathwork sessions. When I guide, I usually mention this at some point, but that healing happens in the presence of an empathetic witness,
Mm,
right? We can do a lot of work on our own, and it's important that we do, but it's when we come together in spaces where we regulate with each other and just knowing that there's support. So you mentioned the hand holding. And
mm,
it's like, it's amazing. Like you mentioned, the power of noticing the difference in the sides, which brings this internal awareness to the individual, which is the other point or other thing I was going to speak to. But even first, just like holding a hand can be
mhm,
one of the most powerful things. It's like just being there, being supportive. Um, Peter Levine, who created somatic experiencing, talks about like he wrote this book where he himself was in an accident. And so in real time, he was watching his own body as he was going through what could potentially cause PTSD. And it's fascinating because he's experiencing it, but he's also so intelligent around what's happening that he's also watching it at the same time. And then he writes
mhm,
about it so eloquently in this book. And so, shout out to Peter Levine. But
mhm,
the idea that he mentions in that accident, long story short, that there's a paramedic comes and is kind of like freaking out over him and trying to adjust everything, and it's like shaking him up, and he's like, and he says, "Can you please back off?" And that gave
mm,
him some autonomy, and that felt good because the guy backed off. And he said, then this other woman came over and just sat next to him, and she held his hand. And he
yeah.
said, if that woman hadn't sat next to me and just held my hand, I forgot how he put it. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it was essentially that he felt like that was the thing that allowed him, one of the aspects that allowed him to not have lingering PTSD after the accident because the woman sat next to him and held his hand, and that was it. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to fix anything, right? She was just there,
Mhm,
and that's just like, oh my God, like how powerful that is that we can just be with someone that we care for. We just be there. We don't have to
yeah.
fix things all the time. We don't have to, tinker, you know? Um, yeah.
Just you saying that the woman came and sat next to him, I felt this like, in my body because I understand the power in that. And especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, but for me personally, as a parent, there's times when my child might have a really high fever or be really ill, and I feel powerless. But the most powerful thing that I can do is literally to just sit by their side and like put my hand on them. And I know
Mm,
this by my own personal experience. The last surgery that I had to have, my mom was there by my side. It ended up being an emergency surgery. And I can't ever forget the way that it felt to just have her sitting at the foot of my bed and to just be there
mm,
and to not try to fix or to like, Autumn, do you want this? Do you need me to do that? To just sit with me, to just sit and be with me. So if we could all just remember to just sit and be, I mean, they teach this a lot at Kripalu to just be present with somebody. No need
mhm,
to respond, to fix, to change, and to just be there with them. Hold their hand, sit by their side, offer them co-regulation
mhm.
is a beautiful gift.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Perfectly said. So last thing I'll say, and then I want to ask, just ask a question to like tie everything together. Is the one other thing about the hand holding is it's just bringing that extra level of internal awareness. So to
Mm,
tie that to something we were talking about earlier was just that idea that like it's deceptively simple because it's perhaps the most profound, powerful thing, which is allowing ourselves to feel with heightened attunement and heightened
mhm,
sensitivity, and that it's not even about quote unquote changing something, right? Like it's not necessarily a question of like biohacking something or figuring something out. It's the profound healing process of just allowing our body to feel fully, you
mhm.
know? And so
Yeah.
offering that even just through a handhold and noticing the difference between the left and right side, as simple as it is. And it doesn't even necessarily have to mean fixing something, figuring something out. It's just like the fact that you do both that, it's such a profound thing. So it's just beautiful. So again, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I love that everything kind of came back to simple. Like we talked
Mm,
about planting the seeds, and it was the simple moment of watching the leaf flicker in the light, or the simplicity of being present with somebody, or the simplicity of my healing journey, which was just like sleep really good and like take care of yourself. Like
mm.
how simple breathing can be, but how profound it can be. So simplicity is a beautiful practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned at this new place, congratulations again. And
Thank you.
also thank you for everything you're doing because, Connecticut is where I grew up. It's a home base for me. And, I always wondered because I lived in New York City for so long and then again in Los Angeles for a little bit. And I always wonder, I'm like, where's the wellness community in Connecticut? I know
Mhm.
there's so many beautiful wellness practitioners that I continue to meet. But I'm still relatively like finding my footing in the area in terms of community. And so I just want to reflect like in this connection around the retreat and when you reached out about that, when we've been connecting, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for everything you're doing because you're on your journey, which is profound in and of itself, and then the clients that you work with, which is amazing, and you are single-handedly tying community together through everything you're doing in a bigger and bigger
Mm.
and bigger way every time I connect with you. And so I'm very grateful for everything you're doing. Um,
Thank
yeah, and so you mentioned having working with teenagers, working with high school age. I know you do women's retreats, and obviously, like you
you.
mentioned, working with clients, and so you work with adults a ton and plenty. And so can you just tell me like round it all out for me? So you've got the thing going in the school. You mentioned the camp related activities for teenagers, but
Mhm.
then yeah, women's retreats, silent disco,
Yeah.
classes. Yeah, just lay it all out for me. What you
All
got
the
going on?
things,
Yeah.
all the tools that help me. The yoga practices, I teach yoga every Sunday morning. We do offer sober silent disco dance parties, cold plunging and breathwork workshops, women's wellness retreats. I'd really love to merge into the co-ed space. Um, there's been a deep, profound transformation for me in that space. So when that call comes, I'm ready for it.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that rounds everything out. I do creative workshops here in town where we just craft and we get together. Um, yeah, it's just whenever inspiration calls and I see that there's a need for something, I tend to answer that call and try to bring community together in that way. So really, I appreciate you recognizing that and communicating that. And a lot of people have come to experiences that I've offered. In the summer, I do floating sound baths.
Mm.
Um, and a lot of people have said like, "Holy cow, I thought I had to go to LA or be at some like really cool resort in like Phoenix to experience something like this." And the fact that it's here in Connecticut, like, oh my
Yeah.
God. So it ties into what you said, that there are experiences and there is a need for that here, to not have to go to some great destination to experience transformation. Like we said, you could have it just sitting still in the woods, but it helps to have an offered workshop and a community and a leader there for you. So there's a
Mhm.
big call for it. And I really want to support. We each have a unique way of delivering even the same thing. Like you and I could teach a breath workshop completely different.
Mhm.
Um, so I recognize that and just want to call forward and offer a nurturing space for all of those people to come share their gifts and to
Beautiful.
find the tools. Yeah.
Beautiful. And it's Woodbury, Connecticut?
It's New Milford.
Oh, New Milford. Okay,
The new
great.
properties. Yep. New Milford, Connecticut.
New Milford. Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool, cool, cool. Beautiful. And then now, so this is all in-person things, which is fantastic. And then also online. So what are the best ways to check out your stuff and connect with you and like like Instagram handle, all that stuff?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So Instagram is Become the Dream Seeker. That's also my website is becomethedreamseeker.com. And you can find any upcoming events there. You could find the retreat center information there. Always great to follow on Instagram though, because I post pop-up events there and collaborate with a lot of other spaces. So those are the two best places to keep in touch and to see what's going on.
Beautiful. All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's great talking, and I look forward to collaborating and continuing to connect in this journey. And again, thank you again for everything you're doing.
Yeah, same. Thank you.
Thank you for joining Mindfulness Unscripted. You could reach out anytime at jonorsini.com, JONORSINI, for free discovery calls, Zoom sessions, questions, reflections, comments, whatever you need. You can find me on Instagram at Jon Orsini, on YouTube at Mindfulness Unscripted, and on Spotify. See you next time.